Close your eyes for a second. Imagine the sound of a chainsaw. What do you see? Maybe you see a lumberjack in a flannel shirt cutting down a massive oak tree in a forest. Or maybe you see a masked killer in a horror movie chasing a teenager through the dark. We associate the chainsaw with two things: destruction of nature and destruction of life. It is a loud, aggressive, terrifying machine. But what if I told you that for nearly 100 years, the chainsaw was not used on trees, it was used on people? What if I told you that the original chainsaw was much smaller, much sharper, and it was designed to be used inside a hospital room, on a conscious patient, without anesthesia? Welcome to the Mundane Files. Today, we are investigating the blood-curdling history of the chainsaw. This isn't a story about wood. This is a story about the nightmare of childbirth in the 18th century, the desperation of doctors, and how a surgical tool designed to save lives eventually became the monster we know today. To understand the invention of the chainsaw, we have to travel back to Scotland in the year 1780. The world of medicine was a horror show. There were no antibiotics, there was no proper hygiene, and most importantly, there was no anesthesia. If you had surgery, you felt everything. But the most dangerous thing a woman could do in the 18th century was give birth. In most cases, nature took its course, but sometimes a baby would get stuck. The baby would be too large, or the mother's pelvis would be too small. In modern times, doctors would simply perform a C-section, cesarean section. It takes 45 minutes, it's safe, and the mother feels no pain. But in 1780, a C-section was a death sentence. It was considered murder. If a doctor cut open a woman's stomach, the infection would almost certainly kill her within days. So doctors had to find another way. They had to get the baby out without cutting the stomach, and the only way to do that was to widen the exit. They performed a procedure called a symphysiotomy. I want you to brace yourself, because this is gruesome. A symphysiotomy involved taking a knife and slicing through the cartilage and bone of the woman's pelvis right in the middle to physically pry her hips apart and create enough space for the baby to pass through. Remember, no anesthesia. The woman was awake, screaming, held down by nurses. The problem was, using a small knife and a handsaw was slow, it was messy, it took too long, and the pain caused many women to go into shock and die on the table. Two Scottish doctors, John Aitken and James Jeffrey, watched this horror unfold. They realized they needed a tool that could cut through human bone faster, cleaner, and with less effort. They went to their workshop, and they invented something that would change history.
The year is 1785. Doctors Aitken and Jeffrey unveiled their invention. They called it the Osteotome. It didn't look like the massive gas-powered monster you see today. It looked more like a kitchen knife, but with a twist. Imagine a small handle connected to a metal chain. On the chain, there were tiny serrated teeth, like the teeth of a shark. By turning a hand crank at the top, the chain would rotate around a metal blade. It was essentially a chainsaw. The doctors claimed it was a miracle. Because the chain moved continuously, it could slice through the pelvic bone in seconds rather than minutes. It reduced the time of the operation. It reduced the trauma. For nearly a century, this hand-cranked chainsaw was a standard piece of medical equipment. If you walked into a surgical theater in the 1800s, you would see a surgeon holding this device, covered in blood, cranking the handle as he cut through bone. It was used for symphysiotomies. It was used for amputating legs on the battlefield. It was considered a tool of mercy because speed meant less pain. But as the 19th century progressed, medicine advanced. Anesthesia was discovered, hygiene improved, and finally, the C-section became safe. Doctors stopped sawing women's pelvises apart. The medical chainsaw was retired to the museum shelves. It seemed like the chainsaw's story was over. It was destined to be a forgotten medical oddity. But then, in 1905, a man in San Francisco looked at this medical design and had a different idea. He looked at the giant redwood trees of California, trees so thick that regular axes couldn't cut them down. He thought, if that chain can cut through human bones so easily, why can't it cut through wood? This man was Samuel J. Benz. He filed a patent for the endless chainsaw. But there was a problem. His machine was massive. It was heavy. It required 2 or 3 men to operate it. It wasn't portable. It was a steam-powered beast that was dragged into the forest. For decades, the chainsaw remained a clunky industrial machine. It wasn't until World War II that everything changed.
In the 1920s and 30s, a German engineer named Andreas Stihl began experimenting with a new technology, the gasoline engine. Before this, chainsaws were electric or steam-powered, meaning they had to be plugged in or were too heavy to move. Stihl developed a lightweight, gas-powered motor that could be carried by one man. In 1926, he patented the first electric chainsaw. In 1929, he made the gas version. The company he founded, Stihl, is still the most famous chainsaw brand in the world today. Suddenly, the chainsaw wasn't just for industry, it was portable. A single man could walk into a forest and destroy a tree in minutes that used to take hours. When World War II broke out, chainsaws became essential. They were used to clear jungles in the Pacific. They were used to build bridges in Europe. Soldiers returned home to America with knowledge of these powerful machines. By the 1950s, the chainsaw had entered the American suburbs. It became a symbol of masculinity. The lumberjack image was born. Fathers bought them to trim hedges in their backyards. It was a tool of progress, of construction, of man conquering nature. The dark medical history was completely forgotten. Nobody remembered the screaming women in Scottish hospitals. They only heard the roar of the 2-stroke engine. But then, pop culture took a dark turn. In the 1970s, the chainsaw transitioned from a tool of work to a weapon of terror. In 1974, a low-budget movie was released that would change the reputation of the chainsaw forever. It was called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The director, Tobe Hooper, claimed he got the idea while standing in a crowded hardware store. He was frustrated by the crowd and looked at a display of chainsaws. He thought, I could clear a path through this crowd in seconds if I just started that machine. That dark thought became the movie. The film featured a villain named Leatherface who wore a mask made of human skin and wielded a chainsaw. The sound of the revving engine became the sound of pure horror. Audiences were terrified. The chainsaw wasn't just sharp, it was loud, it was messy, and it was chaotic. It became the ultimate symbol of slasher movies. Psychologically, the chainsaw is terrifying because it represents uncontrollable destruction. A knife is silent, a gun is quick, but a chainsaw creates a scene of carnage. It vibrates, it screams, and it tears rather than cuts. Ironically, this brought the chainsaw full circle. It started in 1780 as a tool to cut human flesh and bone in a hospital. It evolved into a tool to cut wood and build civilization. And then, in our nightmares and movies, it returned to its original purpose, cutting human flesh and bone. The history of the chainsaw is a perfect example of how technology is neutral. The machine doesn't care what it cuts, it only cares that it cuts efficiently.
The same mechanism that was designed to save a baby's life in a primitive operating room is the same mechanism used to clear the Amazon rainforest and the same mechanism used to scare teenagers on Halloween. So, the next time you hear that distinct buzz of a chainsaw in your neighborhood, don't just think of lumberjacks. Think of Doctors Aitken and Jeffrey. Think of the 18th century operating table. And remember that some of the most mundane tools in our garage have the bloodiest origins imaginable. This has been the Mundane Files. If this story made you look at your garden tools differently, hit that subscribe button, and please, be careful out there. The file is closed.
But the chainsaw isn't the only tool hiding a blood-curdling secret. If you think this was disturbing, you need to see the investigation on the left. Find out why the simple fork in your kitchen was once banned by the church and called the devil's tool. Or click the video on the right to discover why the treadmill at your gym was originally invented to torture prisoners in Victorian England. The files are waiting for you. Click one now to continue the investigation.